Hello and welcome to the Good Society Forum. My name is Emma Skye and I'm Director of Yale World Fellows and co-host of the Good Society Forum, which is a community of change makers around the world with a common quest to build the good society.
So it is a staple in my life, but just wanted to just share a few facts as we're talking about how sport should be a good society, just for us to have as we start this conversation. So these are important facts about why the world needs sport. So worldwide obesity has tripled by just a huge amount since 1975. It's tripled. Worldwide obesity is tripled since 1975. Huge, huge stat there. And then also over 340 million children and adolescents aged 5 to 19 were overweight or obese in 2016. So that is a lot of people. And 79% of adults don't exercise enough. Also, another interesting fact is that the leading causes of death are preventable. So this is heart disease, cancer, diabetes. With sport and wellness, some of these causes of death are actually preventable. So that is just some tidbits, but I want to focus on 3 key ways in which sport has actually shaped my life very personally and professionally. That is sport and its role in gender equality, sport and the role in economic empowerment, and sport and activism. So I just want to quickly touch on those as we go on with this introduction. So first of all, sport and gender equality. It's something that I think a lot of people really don't think about. Sport can be a powerful driver in gender equality. And I know this through my work working with African adolescent girls across the continent and mentoring these girls and really just taking them through the things that sport has taught me and the leadership lessons that I've learned through sport and helping build these girls as great leaders. We know that through sports, girls learn self-confidence, they learn teamwork, they learn discipline. And so this is a powerful way in which we can help close the gender gap. Another thing that is interesting is that here in the US, where I am, we've had Title IX since the early 1970s. And there's been studies that have been done that shows that through this, women really are able to feel empowered when they have those opportunities and have the same opportunities as men. And they're not in a space where they are suddenly feeling less confident. And so we've seen that in this research that women who end up having opportunities end up choosing some male-dominated fields like STEM. And so it's really an equalizer. It's a powerful equalizer. And so this is an interesting phenomenon that I think many other nations outside of the US are continuing to explore how sport and gender equity are related. The second piece of this is sport and economic empowerment, as I mentioned. And so here's some interesting stats. First of all, the sports market globally is $488 billion, which is huge. In North America, they lead, and 20% of the US population is employed in the sports industry. In China, the sports industry is said to be growing faster than the national economy, than the rest of the national economy. And the sports ecosystem in Europe employs more people than the mining industry. So this is the type of economic empowerment that sports fuels. And I think this is really, really important as we think about other emerging areas and geographies around the world. Sports and the ecosystem help fuel growth. For me, I know that one of my dreams in life is to see Africa, the continent of Africa, host an Olympic Games. Think about the type of opportunities that that would present in terms of growth for the continent. And so the last bit is sports and activism. And I think this is something that we are seeing right now happening as we are here in the US having, a lot of conversations about things like racial injustice. You're seeing more and more athletes who are activists, who are speaking out, who are helping lead and drive change. And so I think this is something that we're going to see more and more, and a very important part of building the good society. Advocacy and being an activist are really important parts of sport as well. And so I'm excited to have a great conversation about sport as a foundation of the good society. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Simeon. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you.
So our second speaker is Luc Granville Shaw, who's the leader of Bristol to Beijing, a tandem cycle ride, which is defining what is possible with a cancer diagnosis. 2 years ago, when Luc was 24, he was diagnosed with rare and aggressive stage 4 cancer. He's also the founder of Facing Up podcast, which I was honored to be on a few weeks ago. So Luc, great to have you join us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Emma. Thank you, Niz. Thank you, Simi, as well. And thank you to everyone here who is taking the time to listen. I'm going to take this conversation in another direction again and think a bit more in general terms about the power of physical activity. And in doing so, I'm going to draw very much on my own story and my own experience. And then towards the end of the conversation, I'm going to take this into a slightly wider sphere of how physical activity and exercise and sport can play a really important part in each of our lives in how we overcome challenges. So to begin, let me tell you about my own story. But let me ask you to go back to when you were 24 years old. What were you doing then? You just started your graduate degree, your first business. Perhaps you'd made your first pivot. You're working your way up the career ladder. You're living the dream. Well, I was also living my dream in perhaps the most exciting place that I could think of, Siberia. I was out there studying Russian, making friends, and improving my language. I was doing local races, running races in the Ural Mountains, in Yekaterinburg, in Tyumen. In short, my life was incredibly enjoyable and fulfilling. Now, there was one fly in the ointment. I had a sort of niggle in my left shoulder, an ache that wouldn't go away. And as any good athlete would do, I ignored it. Very successfully for some months, in fact. It took me a long time to go to the school nurse, and it was her reaction that said it all. She said, "Боже мой, oh my God." 48 hours later, I was back in the UK with a biopsy needle sticking into my back. And then at the age of 24, on the 19th of June 2018, the doctors told me I had cancer. Stage 4 cancer. The primary tumor in my shoulder had spread to my lungs. It was very aggressive. It was very rare. My outlook was bleak. You can probably guess what happened next. I went for a run. In fact, my dad dragged me out the door. I was not in the mood for everything, but I am incredibly grateful to him for picking me up and getting me outside. And in that period, when I was very receptive to advice in the outdoors, in the fresh air with endorphins in my system, he gave me some advice which shaped my attitude for the months that came. I realized that this was a horrible situation to be in, but I had to do everything that I could to get through it in the best way possible, to help myself. And this is where exercise came in. This was a small way that I could try and improve my odds, improve the way I dealt with the situation, and perhaps, just perhaps, improve the outcome. I cycled into hospital for my chemotherapy. I was in hospital for 3 days. Each day I'd go out walking for an hour and perhaps do 15, 20 minutes on my bike in hospital with a drip in my arm. And at the end of those 3 days, with no hair, no eyebrows, I would then cycle back home. And between cycles, I would run, I would ride my bike. I would try and keep as fit as possible in the best shape that I could. 2/3 of the way through, there was a half marathon taking place in Bristol. And I ran it, and I completed it. And I completed it in 80 minutes. Now, why is this important? Why do I talk about exercise? Well, it gave me 3 things. It helped me physically, it helped me mentally, and it helped me emotionally. And it'll help each one of you in these ways as well. Now, to start with, physically, it helped me withstand the chemo treatment much more effectively. It actually enhanced the chemotherapy, getting more blood to the tumor itself. And it kept my organs and my muscles stronger. Now, you think, oh, well, you should take it easy when you're on chemotherapy. Well, that is not very good advice. Because if you were to lie in bed for a week, just if you were well, think what that would do to your body. It doesn't make it any better when you're on chemotherapy. You should be trying to be as physically active as possible throughout that time. It also helped mentally. Taking control of the situation, knowing that you're taking a positive step to do something that might just help, is incredibly powerful. And it changes your identity away from simply being a patient that is prodded and studied and injected into a person, into Luc Granville Shaw again. Now, it helped emotionally. The endorphins that you get from exercise are probably the most powerful antidepressant that we know. And the only reason that I can smile generally is because I've gone for a run. Today is no different. So it's an incredibly powerful way of dealing with stressful, difficult situations, in getting some space, clearing one's mind, processing some of the difficulties and the challenges that life throws at us. I'm incredibly lucky to be here now. But if I had died, would that make everything that I've just said invalid? No. Exercise allowed me to live each and every day more fully and better than I would have been able to otherwise had I just stayed at home on the couch. And so even if I had died at a young age, then I would have died happier and more fulfilled, having done everything I could and having put myself in a position to live each day in an enjoyable and fulfilling manner. So that is my story. Exercise can help us physically, mentally, and emotionally. And these are things that we need in our lives each and every passing day. Now, I think I'm out of time, but they help us in the face of depression. Exercise helps us if there's problems with obesity, and it also helps us age successfully. And I'll finish by saying that it doesn't matter where you start. Physical activity, if that's just walking up the stairs, that is so much better than not walking up the stairs. If that's walking around the block, that is so much better than walking around the block. And I think one of the biggest questions ahead of us is how can we make our society more active and people enjoy being active and doing the best things for their own health. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Luc, thank you so much. That was incredibly inspiring. And can't wait to hear you speak further when we do our Q&A. And for those who have questions or thoughts or ideas, please do feel free to comment in the chat function, and we will put them to our speakers shortly. Our final speaker is Charlotte Roche, founder and CEO of Rabble, a UK organization that makes exercise fun. Charlotte is a former international triathlete who left elite sport after a near-fatal training accident. After cycling from Beijing to London to raise money for charity, Charlotte founded Rabble, and I'm keen to hear how you can disguise exercise as play for those of us who find it a struggle sometimes. Charlotte, looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thanks very much for having me. So yeah, I'm also gonna begin with a bit of a personal story. Sport has always been a huge part of my life. I think when I was 3, I asked for swimming lessons and got into quite serious sport from an early age. For those of you who swam know that means lots of early mornings and lots of long sessions in the pool. And I was I guess having started early, always benefited from being quite fit, really enjoying exercise, enjoying sport through school, and always swam alongside it. I wasn't particularly good at swimming, but I was certainly very committed. When I got to high school, ended up running internationally. I ran cross country and on the track internationally for the UK, and again was very fortunate to benefit from a whole load of lucky circumstances. I think one of the most powerful influences in my sporting career was without a doubt my coach, who was a volunteer, and I think are hugely underplayed in the sort of role that they have with young athletes. When I got to uni, I was still very much training almost as a full-time athlete while studying, and I got the opportunity pre-2012 to train full-time as a triathlete. So I moved to the British Triathlon Training Centre to train for the Olympics full-time. And several months into moving there, ended up out on my bike and having a really unfortunate training accident. One day was doing, 40 hours of training a week, and the next day was unable to breathe for myself. I'd broken my back in 12 places, punctured both my lungs, broken my collarbone, ribs, pretty much everything, and had to work out where I went from here. And I think sport had very much shaped my attitude towards that. It was another hurdle that I needed to overcome as an athlete. It was another painful experience that you kind of try to endure. And I think in that situation, I was possibly similar to Luc, I guess, maybe the only person who didn't think that I was going to die. I continued to try to train as much as I could in that situation. I found the medical advice generally quite unhelpful. I think I did a 90-minute run 2 weeks after spinal surgery. And 6 months after the whole experience, after teaching myself to walk, swim and cycle again, I was racing an international triathlon. And I think I finished 4th, won some decent prize money, and then a few months later had to have another round of spinal surgery and my collarbone fixed. So that was the kind of background to sport that I'd had. It had always been very central to my life, and I couldn't really imagine my life without it. But after having the spinal surgery and the collarbone surgery for the second time, I went back to university to finish my degree. And coming out of the back of that, realised that I was rescued by the Air Ambulance, which was a charity. And I felt that my life as an athlete wasn't that fulfilling. I felt like people had donated money to save my life, and the least that I could do was to raise money to save somebody else's. So when I graduated, I flew to Beijing and I cycled in the opposite direction to Luc back to London to raise money for the Air Ambulance. And when I returned, I got a job in London after graduating, and I realised that I fell out of love with exercise. I finished work at the end of the day feeling quite tired, and the last thing I wanted to do was go to the gym. I'd never not been active before, and I could see myself falling into inactivity. I'd find myself in the gym wondering why I was here, what I was trying to achieve, what I was doing, and without a performance goal, I just really couldn't motivate myself to go. And I realised that for the first time, I really understood that large percentage of the population who don't exercise, who are classified as inactive. And for many people, exercise is viewed as a kind of no pain, no gain. And that's really how the exercise industry builds itself. At school, as a primary school child, generally exercise is about play and learning and exploring. As a secondary school child, exercise becomes a performance thing. You either make the school team or you try to avoid exercise altogether. And I think this shift in this attitude is central in people's behaviour for life. And so what I decided to do was I decided to quit my job and try to change this perception of exercise. So I founded an organisation called Rabble, and Rabble's goal is to make exercise fun. So we disguise exercise in the form of play. and we'll play pretty much anything, so long as it's accessible, so anyone can join in. It's enjoyable, it's social, so we always play in teams, and we always play as a group with a common aim, and there'll be a workout hidden behind it. So the idea is that you won't, you'll be playing the game, but it's impossible to participate without getting a really, really good workout off the back of it. So we'll disguise interval training or strength training behind a team game objective. And we'll play everything from pretty much British Bulldogs to dodgeball to capture the flag to games that we've made up. And really the goals that we have are as along the lines of just making sure that people do something because they want to do it, and that intrinsic motivation is just so powerful. And what we've seen in our communities is that people who join and play will make friends, which improves their physical, mental and social well-being. They'll obviously get the benefits out of the exercise itself, and they'll stay a member of our community for an extremely long time. Our average membership is more than double the length of an average gym. And that really does just show the power of play and of games. And so we've tried to strip all of the aesthetic profile, the marketing, the pain messages away from what we do. And in fact, we rarely talk about exercise itself. We often talk about fun, we talk about play, we talk about games, we talk about the community. And that's what really brings people together at the end of the day. And yeah, that's where we're at. We train at Rabble, we train instructors on a kind of a very simple model. So we've got instructors across the globe who run local sessions every week. Thanks.
Charlotte, thank you so much for sharing. And I think we should, I don't know what Emma thinks, I think we should have a group Rabble session as a Good Society Forum. I think that would be great exercise. But Luc, Simi, Charlotte, thank you for sharing, and especially sharing such personal stories of what you've gone through and what you've overcome, and the power of physical activity to galvanize you for good. So, I mean, I have one initial question I'd love to ask each of you, because obviously physical activity and sport plays a huge role in your personal lives, as well as the work that you do by extension. How have you coped with the current situation of COVID and lockdown, where, you know, things have been made far more difficult for us to be out there? So maybe I can ask Simi first, in terms of how the current situation has personally impacted you and what measures you've taken to ensure that the physical activity has continued. You're on mute, Simi.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Cool.
So when COVID started, it was actually the start of my off season. So I have two goals in my off season: just do nothing and eat everything. So for the first 6 weeks of COVID, I was just enjoying that. But then I realized, as the pandemic kind of raged on, and as I needed to get back in sport, that's when all of those benefits of sport that Luc mentioned really came to life for me. So as I started getting back into training, I just felt better, I just psychologically, physically, everything. And so it's been a challenge, because here where I am, gyms are still closed. And so I'm not able to get in the weight room and do some of the things I normally would do, but it's actually a fun challenge to reimagine how to train now. And so I'm doing a lot of stuff with my body weight and resistance training and med balls and everything I can find in the house, just to try to maintain my strength as much as possible. And just being outdoors, I go to parks. And so I'm just finding innovative ways to stay in shape and do what I need to do to prepare for the season ahead of me.
Simi, thank you. And Luc, if I can come to you next and ask the same question, how have you personally coped with the lockdown?
Yeah, so it was quite impactful for me. I was out in Central Europe cycling en route to Beijing, and I had to pause it because of lockdown, or because of COVID and the lockdown that ensued. So that was really, that was, in some ways that could have been a massive derailment, but I think it's something I fundamentally believe in now, that, within every difficulty. Within every challenge, there's an opportunity. And that's what led to me starting up the podcast and then talking to Emma, which is a fantastic chat. And I would definitely recommend everyone to check it out. Indeed with Charlotte as well. Now, for me, I was still able to exercise 1 hour, you could still do your, whatever it is, one piece of exercise a day. I was out running. I was fortunate to be in Bristol, not in London. So there were, parks open. I could go out on my bike. So I managed to keep on training, but it did give avenues for experimentation. I started doing yoga, which is something that I always said I would do and never did. So I joined a yoga group via Zoom. I also, with some friends, did body weight workout sessions, a bit like Simi. Via Zoom, we had at one point one person in Jordan, one person in the US, and then me in the UK. And in some senses, I've never been stronger, which isn't hard for a runner. You don't really have much upper body. So the only way was up, really. And it's also just been a chance to try different things because there aren't any races to train for, which I might have done otherwise. I've taken it in a different direction. And over the last month, I've done some running and backpacking from Bristol all the way around the southwest coast to Falmouth, probably about 350 miles, sleeping in a sleeping bag and a bivy bag. It's a very, very different sort of challenge. You're not trying to run fast. You're just trying to keep going. But there are always opportunities out there, and you can just push things in different directions if you're open to it. So that's what I've been getting up to.
Wow, Luc, thank you so much. Charlotte, and if I could pose it slightly differently to you, given the work that you do with the Rabble, in the UK, we've certainly seen a captive audience of people who've been enamored by Mr. Joe Wick, which is a personality from YouTube, a fitness personality who has effectively become part of the national curriculum and daily diet of viewing. How have you ensured that your members and people who participate, as well as yourself, have adapted to the situation of lockdown?
Yeah, it was it was a massive change for us. Obviously, we had to close all our sessions with minimal notice. In fact, I was following the guidelines quite closely, and we decided to close prior to the government guidelines because we felt that we were putting people's health at risk, which obviously is a difficult decision to make when you decide to turn all revenue to zero overnight. So it's affected us in quite a massive way. I think particularly the sort of exercise that we do, you're absolutely dependent on other people. It is all about the teamwork. It's all about making it enjoyable and people working together. So it's literally impossible to recreate what we do without some serious technology, which I think is coming, but certainly isn't there in the way in which we need it, and certainly isn't mainstream enough to engage the people that we were hoping to. So we've had to, we looked at what we were doing, and we looked at and what we could do, and really our priority was to support the community. There were lots of people offering, there's an incredible community response, as I'm sure you saw from Joe Wicks and lots of others. And so there was lots of things that you could do physically by yourself at home, but there was very little for mental and social well-being during the lockdown, and that's where we decided to focus our efforts as a community, which seems obviously bizarre for a fitness company, but that's where we felt that we could add the most value. So we effectively volunteered our own time and mobilized some of the community themselves to organize everything from, like, we had a regular quiz on a Thursday, we had countdown games, we've had charade sessions, we've started a book club. So we had like this huge schedule of social events that the community have been putting on and that we've been running weekly, just to support people mentally and socially, which is one of the huge impacts that COVID's had. So hopefully we'll be starting again next week with the outdoor stuff, obviously in a different format, socially distanced, but still team games and still inclusive and still enjoyable. But yeah, we've had to pretty much change everything and think about the way in which we behave, I guess, as a community.
Wow, thanks, Charlotte. And Simi, I have a question for you next, and which will open up to everybody from Dr. Atim, who's dialing in from Nigeria. Who says, I usually hear how good exercising is for our health and personally has witnessed the great benefits since it became a part of a regular routine over the past 3 years. But sometimes, and I think this is obviously maybe on the extreme of how some people might slump or at worst, sometimes die while exercising. So my question is, when does exercising become too much? How do we ensure that exercise does not culminate into excessive stress in the body? And as an athlete, I'm sure you have a competitive streak to try and push yourself too far. So how do you fight that urge? How do you find the balance?
Well, I mean, I think that is the job of athletes at an elite level. It is about pushing yourself and pushing your limits, but you have to do that in a way that makes sense. And from a very early age, coaches have always kind of instilled in me the idea of listening to your body. Your body will tell you when it's too much. If you are, feeling those cramps, or you're feeling like your hamstring start to pull, your body is telling you something. Even days when I wake up and I'm feeling a lot more tired than usual, sometimes I know, okay, I need a recovery day. But instinctively, I just want to push and push and push. But sometimes your body is saying, no, it's time to rest. And that's an important part of training. Today actually is my recovery day. So that's why I can join you today. But you need to integrate recovery as part of your workout. It's just as important. But the challenge here in answering this question is that this looks very different for everybody. Everyone has their own unique situations, their circumstances, and their own limitations. And so I would just encourage you to just take it little steps. You don't have to, take big, giant steps at the beginning, especially when you're just starting. Just start by just doing, the minimal amount, and then just build on that little by little by little. And also talk to experts. That's where coaches and trainers come in, and they can help guide you on these things. So that's what I would say. Just listen to your body.
Thank you, Simi. And Luc, I'd love for you to answer the same question, but also Malcolm has asked, what tips would you give to young people who don't exercise? And maybe one of the reasons why they don't exercise is because they think exercising, as Charlotte has said, it goes from being play to being this super competitive thing. And so trying to be perfect all the time becomes so difficult. So what tips can we give to young people?
I think that's a really good question, and a really challenging one. I think, the depending on what we mean by young people, but certainly the sort of adolescent years, I think we've all been in that situation where sometimes you're not motivated to do anything at all. It doesn't matter if it's exercise or not. I would say that try and find some form of exercise that you're excited about, and it might not be running, and it might not be rugby. It could be skeleton, it could be kickboxing. Is there something that is cool and active, whatever cool means to each individual person, that might be more appealing? I think as we move beyond the teenage years into sort of the young adults, I think exercise as part of a routine and integrating it into a lifestyle can be a really good way of staying active. And I think in some ways, this is perhaps where there's a difference between sport, which is a sort of carve out this chunk of time, and there is some incredible benefits there, which you can't get sort of just through perhaps riding your bike to work. And so I think, people who commute by bike, we've seen, a big increase in, say, London over the past, 5-10 years. To me, if it becomes part of your routine and you're active in just the way that you live your life on a day-to-day basis, I think that's a really, really positive step to being healthier, de-stressing after whatever happened at work. So to me, that's something that I know works for me, that when I run into the station or whatever, or I cycle to and from a place, and that becomes part of my routine, then it becomes second nature. And that's very effective.
Thank you, Luc. And Charlotte, I'd love to get a sense from you of anything that you have to say in regards to, when is it too far in terms of exercise, as also an elite athlete? How do we engage young people? And there's a question here from Daji around, we know physical exercise is really important for health, but it's also clear that overweight and obesity is really becoming more and more prevalent. So what could be the solutions to combat that, as well as to see a world that's doing more physical exercise, and maybe in the context of sharing good practice that you've seen on both of those issues?
Yeah, I think actually all of those questions, they kind of all overlap in the sense that you kind of, if you're doing too much, your body will reject it at some point, either mentally or physically. You'll just not enjoy it. And that's really common in as an athlete. You kind of need to get as close to that wire as you can for as long as possible, and that's kind of where you hang out. But that's not where you create sustainable habits or behaviors for life. And I think again, coming back to the young people, that's the key. If you're a child at school, you don't really have a choice. You're not choosing to do a lot of the activities that you're forced into. And essentially, the feeling that I think really turns a lot of people off exercise is a feeling of inadequacy. It's really exposing to not be as good as others at a certain task, whether that's in schoolwork or whether that's physically. And I think that's a real issue. And similarly, this then ties into your behaviors later. I think obviously if you set good habits early on in life, it's very easy to maintain those. But if you're able to find something that's a bit more personalized, that you're really excited about doing, that you really love doing, and if it's with other people as well, that combination of it being social and positively fulfilling, as in something that you enjoy doing, then you're probably setting yourself up for a really strong set of habits in the long run. I think the idea of kind of prescribing something that people have to do is a great way of ensuring that they're probably never going to do it, or they're going to resent doing it, and that in general that doesn't lead to great results. So really tapping into that intrinsic motivation of what people what you really love doing is for sure the best way to get the most out of people in terms of getting them to do it or sustaining it in the long run.
Thanks, Charlotte. I mean, you saying know what your body tells you and what the limits are reminds me of that one time last year in New Haven when I tried to train with Simi. My body told me very quickly that it wasn't right for me, and I had to stop fairly early on. So I'd share that. We've had loads of amazing comments. Wanjiru, another fellow, 2019 World Fellow, all the way from Nairobi in Kenya, says, hi, great speakers with amazing personal stories. Thank you. Same from Sean, saying thank you to our speakers for speaking. Simi, I have a question here from Rosina, which is, and Rosina, I think, is messaging from Pakistan. In my part of the world, it's quite difficult and unacceptable to do sport as a woman outdoors, and culturally becomes an issue as a mother of two. I wonder whether you've had any experiences of issues around cultural barriers with the work that you do on the African continent, and maybe you're able to share some of those and how you've overcome those.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I actually did see it on the chat box, and some thoughts started to come to mind, particularly around work that I was doing with Nike around some campaigns that were for the entire continent of Africa. And as you know, the continent is very diverse. We have a lot of different cultures within that. So we had to create campaigns that worked for Northern Africa, as well as Sub-Saharan. And so one of the things that did come up are some of these cultural norms and barriers. And the way that we approached it at the time was really looking at how digital could play a role in unlocking that. So knowing that maybe in some areas, the cultural norms don't allow women to be outside in a training environment, we found that digital was a very powerful tool. So we had what we call the Nike Run Club, which is an app that allows you to run on your own, but you're still part of a broader, bigger global community of runners. So you can connect with other runners, you can set your own goals, you can be motivated and share your progress on the app. We also have the Nike Training Club app. So these were ways of trying to combat that, knowing that these cultural norms are very real and exist. So we have those, but we also very deliberately try to break those barriers as well. There's one campaign that comes to mind, which was the first campaign that was across of all of Africa that we did at Nike. And we deliberately chose to lead with a female athlete. And this was a risky move because we knew that in some countries that wouldn't fly, but we wanted that to be the image of a strong, powerful female athlete that we placed at the forefront of that campaign, just showing the strength of a woman and trying to just chip away at some of those cultural norms. And we had success with it. We led with this athlete across the whole continent. So you saw the same athlete. She was Africa's fastest woman at the time, Nigeria's Blessing Okabare. And we used her face to lead this campaign in Morocco, in Algeria, in Nigeria, in South Africa. So that was a really powerful moment of helping to move this forward. And continuing to put out messages like that, I think, help just from an inspirational, aspirational standpoint, and for women to know that sport is for them as well. So those are just a few ways in which we've approached it. Obviously, there's still work to be done. And I think that companies like Nike and other spaces can play a role in this. And what we also found too is that there's people locally in the community that are already doing this work and creating safe spaces for women and girls to train as well in ways that they can do that. So whether it's gathering and having physical run clubs, whether it's female-only gyms, things like that, we see those popping up as well in different contexts.
Simi, thank you so much. I mean, there's so much to that answer. And Luc, I wanna extract a few of those. One which is digital, and we know you have an exceptional podcast. Everybody, please do listen. And I'm sure Simi is the only one, and myself, who haven't been on that. And so, nudge, nudge. But in terms of role models, I think we heard Simi talk about the importance of role models in challenging stereotypes and barriers that otherwise might be presented. In your experience, the work that you've done, how important are role models? And actually, quite bluntly, are we promoting the right types of role models in terms of promoting an active lifestyle? Because actually, when I see the people out there, a lot of them have six packs and run, sub 4-minute kilometers, which I definitely can't do.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating question, and I'm going to sort of take two prongs to that. I think firstly I want to highlight that we live in a slightly bizarre time. I think that on one side there is this obsession over fitness and wellness and being toned and having the six pack, and you see these photos, these Instagram influencers who are literally picture perfect. And yet on the other side, we live in a society where we've never seen high rates of obesity. So there's clearly some disconnect going on there. And that would suggest very likely that a lot of the people who are being looked to as role models are perhaps either not leading to gains in fitness, or perhaps are unsustainable, as Charlotte was talking about. Sure, if you've got 6 hours a day to train and then another 6 hours just to recover, yeah, you can get a good body. But like for the rest of us who actually, have like real work and jobs to do, that's not going to be possible. So to what extent is that giving an illusion of what is possible? And then that would be dispiriting. The other side of this question of role models, I think it's a really interesting one when talking about the cycle ride. And one of the things that I feel strongly about is sort of rewriting the narrative of what is possible with a cancer diagnosis. And this kind of stems from when I was diagnosed. I would have loved to have seen someone in my situation who could offer me some hope, a way of living that when I was diagnosed, I could say, okay, there are no guarantees, but if I do this, I will probably feel better. I might live longer, but it will be a good way to live. And so for me, that's been a powerful motivator about spreading the message of what Bristol to Beijing does. And then also through the podcast Facing Up, it's a much broader focus of actually how do we face up to challenges, because we all face challenges. One of them I faced has been this cancer diagnosis, but each and every one of us on this call who's listening will be able to relate to a challenge that they have had difficulty. That's why it's a challenge. And so, being physically active, being overweight, that's another sort of challenge. And so I think there's a lot of potential to learn from other people around us in how we deal with those.
Thank you, Luc. And Charlotte, I'd love to hear from you specifically around the role models piece. And then we've had a question here, which I'd love to slightly tweak, which is from Sean. And Sean's question, what do speakers think about the sugar tax and state intervention? And what can we do to support the powerful messages? And I'd love to get a broader sense of, we've talked about the power of promoting the right role models in reaching the right types of people. How much should the state be doing, especially as somebody who has a private entity and supports activity? How much more do you think the state should be doing? And then maybe I'd love to hear about the sugar tax answer too. So over to you.
I think one of the other points in here is, and this maybe touches on the cultural question, is that exercise is just a kind of fancy word for movement. There's like loads of ways of moving, and any form of movement is positive. And so I think exercise is a scary word, and it reminds you of like pain and lots of negative emotions, or for lots of people that's the case. And I think that's quite dangerous. And again, on the role models piece, I think picking normal people who haven't, only eaten egg whites and drunk water for 6 weeks, and then women who aren't on crazy diets, I think are often images that are propagated by the fitness industry. And then obviously you've got athlete role models who are in lots of ways much healthier, but being an athlete is quite an extreme way of living. And whilst whilst many of them are incredible people, are quite out of reach, I think, for lots of people. And so I think some more regular stories promoting kind of a balanced lifestyle of, a mixture of foods, a mixture of, types of exercise, and promoting the message that exercise doesn't have to be painful to be effective. Any kind of exercise works. It doesn't have to be no pain, no gain. And the more you can do, the better. Just being more active generally really works. So I think the biggest intervention that the state could do is around education early on. I think changing that interaction that kids have with exercise early doors, I think, is super important. The fact that, being shamed in PE or coming last in a cross-country race or not being picked for the school football team is going to impact your relationship with movement for the rest of your life is really, really tragic. So I think that needs to be a big shift. With regards to taxing foods, possibly. I mean, I'm someone who believes in balance. I eat my fair share of iced lollies alongside salads. But and I don't see necessarily there any harm in making those foods more expensive, but I think education is probably the area that I would look to focus on. And then I think there's certainly in the UK there's more of a push now towards prescription of exercise from GPs. And I think that's a really positive step, not just of exercise, actually, of all kinds of mental wellbeing groups and clubs. And I think, again, that's a really positive step for people to start to take control of their lifestyle and leveraging the advantages of lifestyle in health, I think, as previously they've been completely disconnected. So, I think that's where I would start if I had any power at all.
Well, on that, Charlotte, I'm actually going to come back to you, conscious of time, and we've nearly run out of time. So I have a question for each of you. If I gave you, you rub the genie in the lamp and Will Smith appears, and you have 3 wishes that you could be granted to try and address practically. And I think practically is an important word for the Good Society Forum. We are full of practitioners who are doing stuff. How can we embed a culture of physical activity? Because we've heard the benefits from everything Simi described to what you're describing to what Rook in terms of resilience, confidence, personal, societal activism. 3 things that you could do if you had the powers. We've just given it to you. What are the 3 things that you would enact?
So I guess it depends on the level. I think my advice for the individual is, like, if you're exercising and you're not loving it, you're doing the wrong kind of exercise. Find something else and keep changing until you find something that you love, because unless you're really engaged with it, it's just not going to stick. It's going to be a fad. And then again, like, at a local or education level, make sure whatever you're delivering is fun. Like if you're delivering some absolutely brutal set and you're not talking to elite athletes, you've got your messaging wrong around what you're trying to achieve. You know, less than 1% of the audience is going to be an elite athlete at the end of the day. So it's the other group that you need to be focused on, and for them to stick at it, it needs to be fun. And then again, I would, at the highest level, at a government and a policy level, it would be around the education and the way in which exercise is delivered at the earliest levels, to make sure that that relationship, the way you think about doing a PE lesson or doing an activity, is awesome, this is going to be great fun, not, oh God, I'm going to be last in cross country again, I just don't want to get changed in front of all my friends, and all the stigmas that come with that. I think those are the three things that I would advise. If it's fun, people will do it. They'll pay to do it. You don't need to beg them or force them or tax them. And
I'd vote for you, Charlotte. I would vote for you, Charlotte. Simi, same question to you.
Okay, I think the three themes are access, and when I say access, I mean just the opportunity for everybody to have equal access to sport. I'm going to focus specifically on sport. One of the challenges that I mentioned in my introduction is just around sport and equality. I mentioned Title IX here in the US, which mandates that girls and boys have equal access to sport. That doesn't always happen everywhere in the world. You know, I've listened to girls in Soweto talk about how their high school does not have a football team for them to play. They only have a boys team. And so for me, like, that is like level one. Let's allow everyone to have access. The second piece of access, I guess, if I had a genie, would be everyone gets a cell phone. You get a cell phone, you get an iPhone, you get a Samsung, whatever, because I think digital can really help us unlock that. Think about how many awesome apps there are. I mentioned a couple earlier, but there's so many more. We have watches now. So I think digital, and we're learning this now, particularly in COVID, that is the way forward. That is what's going to help everybody be more active. And the third piece, I mean, is not really a wish, but I like what Charlotte and Luc both said about just thinking about exercise or sport as movement and how you integrate it into your everyday life. I think we naturally do this in Africa. Wanjiru and whoever other Africans are on might know what I'm talking about, but we are walking all the time. Movement is part of our life. My wish is that everybody just adopts that and just creates opportunities to move, whether that's dancing, whatever that looks like for you, just for everyone to make it part of their everyday lives.
Amazing. Simi, thank you. And Luc, last but by no means least, 3 wishes, 3 hopes.
You're very generous. Thank you. So my first one is for there, if I've got the genie and my wishes already made, for there to be a surfeit of research which backs up and strengthens the claims of the power of exercise. I think I speak partly from experience that there's not that much research out there, say, when it comes to treating cancer and the efficacy of chemotherapy, with more research that strengthens the claim with depression. So I think a whole body of research which has been rigorously done and indisputable in what it finds, as indisputable as it can get, would be one of my wishes. The second one is about infrastructure, and I think this is particularly applies to the way we live in, say, in Europe, in America particularly. It doesn't apply, I think, everywhere in the world, particularly, as Simi was saying, in Africa. If I can generalize across a continent, there's a lot more movement going on, a lot more walking. Think how much time we spend sitting down. Think how much time we are in the car or on the train. Making cities places where it's easier to cycle than it is to drive, I think will be a huge step forward, and making more things, making it easier to walk. So I think by changing the infrastructure around us, it can really enable us to live more active lifestyles. So a lot of city planning and you're putting bollards up, so stopping cars getting down lanes so kids can play in the street again, and maybe adults too with rabble. The final one is thinking about the balance that we live we have in our lives. It was very striking to me that during this lockdown period, the number of people, at least I saw in the area that I was in, outside rather than stuck in an office, was very striking how actually people love being outdoors, particularly when the weather's nice, which isn't always the case in the United Kingdom. But for me, the wish would be for people to have balance, so there is time for them to do that physical activity, rather than it's something that they have to sort of shoehorn into the side of their day because they're incredibly busy. So it's that achievement of balance. Maybe digital technologies and Zoom calls like this will be, working from home will be one very important step forward. And I think time will tell there. So those are my 3 wishes.
Luc, incredible. Thank you so much. Luc, Simi, Charlotte, really appreciate your time, your wisdom, your experiences today, and for sharing everything with our Good Society Forum. Emma, over to you.
Thanks, Liz. And I just want to say really thank you to Simi, Charlotte and Luc. You're 3 incredibly inspiring individuals, and it's been amazing listening to you. And thank you to our audience for being here. And please join us again, same time next Wednesday, to discuss hate speech and free speech. Bye.
Bye-bye.